समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Who would have imagined we'll be talking about Poland in contact letter? Because Poland generally is a very low-key country. It's the fastest growing large economy in Europe by some distance. It also has a very interesting geography. Beyond that, not much has been happening in Poland. However, something happened there last night. That is on the intervening night of Tuesday and Wednesday. So a whole bunch of drones, obviously Russian drones, most of these Shahed drones, Iranian-made Shahed drones. These flew into Polish airspace. Say about Polish government, Polish Prime Minister said 19, of which he said at least 4 were shot down, maybe more. The Ukrainians, in this case, Zelensky himself said that more than 2 dozen drones had gone into Polish airspace. Now, whether these came over from the Ukrainian side, because last night Russia also carried out its largest attack, air attack, which is mostly drones and missiles over Ukraine. Some might have come in from over Belarus as well, with which Poland shares a border. I will just explain to you how interestingly Poland is located. And even as I am recording this, news breaks, it's just an alert that the Russians have said that they were not targeting, they did not have any intended targets in Poland whatsoever, and they are willing to sit down with the Polish government and discuss the issue over these drones. So what happened? When these drones came in, then immediately Poland's air defenses came into the act. Not just Poland, but NATO's air defenses also came into the act. So while missiles were fired, also fighter jets from Polish Air Force as well as Dutch Air Force. Polish Air Force, I presume these were the F-16s. They have at least 48 operational F-16 Block 52. That's the same as the most modern version of F-16s that the Pakistanis have. Some of those got airborne. Also, Dutch Air Force F-35s got airborne and they shot down some of these drones. Now, why did these drones come in? What did they want to do? We don't know. However, remember, Poland is a member of NATO. Poland is a member of NATO. In 1999, it became a member of NATO. It's also the highest spending member of NATO by way of defense spending as a percentage of its GDP. It was 4.7%. It's now going up to 5% this year. That's the target that Donald Trump set up for NATO countries, that all NATO countries have now generally accepted, but many talk about getting there by 2030, etc. Poland is already there. In fact, this year, Poland's defense budget is about $48 billion. To put that in perspective, India's entire defense budget is about $79 billion, right? $79 billion and $48 billion just for tiny Poland with a population of just about 3.7 crore people, a little less than 37 million people. What happens in this case? Because so much budget is allocated to a country of a small population and a much smaller army. The total size of Polish armed forces is 3 lakhs, which makes it the largest in Europe. The largest in Europe, third largest in NATO. Third largest in NATO means after the US and also Turkey. But in terms of sheer numbers of forces in NATO, sheer number of troops, Poland is ahead of everybody in Europe. It has 3 lakhs troops. Germany has only 1.81 lakhs, France has 2.03 lakhs, UK has 1.43 lakhs. These are the big countries in Europe, big NATO members. The US maintains about 85,000 troops in Europe, of which about 10,000 are based in Poland. That is what is called as EFP, Enhanced Forward Presence. That's a NATO term. E is spelled as a lowercase, EFP, and Enhanced Forward Presence. Also, the Americans, as part of the NATO deployment, also have an Aegis anti-ballistic missile base on the coast of Poland. Poland has a long coastline with Baltic Sea, and that is where this Aegis system is located. This can intercept both medium range and short range ballistic missiles. So there is a large American presence in Poland as well. Now, Poland so far has been among the most forthright in demanding that NATO be more proactive on Ukraine. Also, Poland has been really building its economy and really building its armed forces. Poland, I told you, has had a high economic growth rate, 4%, which is very high for Europe. The EU's current normal, say approximately of 1.5%, much higher than the global average today of say 2.7%, and already it's an advanced economy. Per capita income of Poland is more than $24,000. That is below the EU average, but it's still very high. It is 1.5 times of China, for example, and rising quite fast. So why would Russia take pangas with a country like Poland? Poland, which is really building its armed forces at a very rapid pace. If it is spending, as I told you, if its defense budget is $48 billion, its population size is so small, its our armed forces personnel are just 3 lakhs, which is about 1/5 of Indian armed forces personnel. You can imagine that a lot of the money is going into fresh acquisitions. So if you look at data, 54+% of Poland's defense budget is going into fresh acquisitions. See the kind of partnerships that Poland has. I told you, NATO's enhanced forward presence, about 10,000 troops. Most of the infrastructure for American troops in Poland has paid for. That is several hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's not as if they've got the Americans to spend for it. Also, the Americans have there an Armored Brigade Combat Team, ABCT as it's called, which has 3.5 to 4,000 soldiers. It has tanks, it has artillery, it has infantry fighting vehicles, it has its own integrated missiles, etc. Then there is a Combat Aviation Brigade that the Americans have on behalf of NATO as part of their forward deployment in Poland, because Poland is the eastern front line of NATO. I will explain to you Poland's borders in a minute. And as we go along, we will also be joined in by Dr. Swasti Rao, who's our consulting editor for strategic and international affairs. You know what? I feel like Asrani's jailer in the movie Sholay. This is the 50th year of Sholay, so I should keep harking back to it. Remember Asrani there saying, हमारे आदमी चारों तरफ फैले हुए हैं, तो हमारे भी आदमी in this case, a brilliant academic who's right now in Poland. She will be joining us from Warsaw once I've given you this basic information. So look at the American presence in Warsaw. These elements, American elements, are all they are all forward elements of the American 5th Corps. On September 3 this year, that is exactly a week before this, Karol Nawrocki, the president, the newly elected president of Poland, met Donald Trump in White House, and Donald Trump reaffirmed his commitment to a robust support, robust alliance with Poland. That's very different from the language he might have used with other NATO allies. Also, it helps that Karol Nawrocki, he's not from the party from which the Prime Minister of Poland comes. Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, comes. Swasti can tell us more about this. However, Donald Tusk's party is a centrist party. Karol Nawrocki party is a right-wing party. However, right-wing party in Europe doesn't necessarily mean right-wing nationalism in the manner of having solidarity with NATO. We found many countries with right-wing governments. Hungary's Orban being an example, Slovakia, which shares a long border with Poland, that being an example. Many of these right-wing parties and leaders actually have an ambivalent view on Russia, on Putin, and also on their country's membership of NATO, which might be the reason that Trump invited Nawrocki for this meeting at White House and not the Prime Minister Donald Tusk. In fact, if you remember that earlier picture, see it on your screens, of European leaders lined up in front of Trump, it's very significant that Poland is missing there, because Poland is a frontline state, is the frontline state, but it's missing there. The reason it was missing was that between the president and the prime minister, they could not decide who should represent the country in these big foreign policy events. In fact, in these foreign policy events, a bit like France, Poland also has a double election system. The prime minister is elected by the party that wins a majority in the lower house of parliament, whereas the president is directly elected. In this case in Poland, the two come from different parties. Now, the important thing is that these drone incursions, although now we've just seen a statement from the chief of general staff in Belarus that they had warned Poland that they might have these drone intrusions. I don't know if anybody sees that as a consolation that they were warned that there might be drone intrusions, because this is a violation of sovereignty. That said, this has come on the eve of a joint Russia-Belarus exercise that's to take place very soon, and this caused quite a bit of disturbance in Poland. 4 major airports of Poland, including 2 in Warsaw, were declared no-fly zones for quite some time. Lots of flights were affected. Now they are back to normal. You've seen all that NATO has in Poland, but Poland's own armed forces are getting stronger very fast. It already has about 650 tanks. Another 250 American Abrams are on order. It has Black Panther tanks, which it's buying from South Korea, and I presume will be manufacturing in collaboration with South Korea. These are among the most modern tanks being built in the entire world. They've already paid for more than 500 HIMARS. These are high mobility artillery rocket systems used very effectively by Ukraine. In fact, we had done an entire episode of Karta Clutter only focused on the use of this weapon system, which had become a game changer for several weeks, because in modern warfare, particularly when you have near peer forces on the two sides, anytime one side brings in something that's better than the other side catches up in the course of time. So Ukraine got the HIMARS. For some time it tilted the balance on the battlefront. Then Russians got other stuff, and this ding-dong battle has gone on. So these HIMARS, 500 plus, now Poland has ordered. They've ordered a lot of Patriot batteries. There were Patriot batteries also in the area where these drones were found, but these are really Shahed drones. You will not fire off such expensive Patriot missiles chasing after them. Poland itself has 32 F-35s on order. It has 96 Apache attack helicopters on order, and it has taken 2 used Saab 340 airborne early warning and control systems, similar to what Pakistan Air Force has, from UAE. These are second-hand from UAE. Poland's navy is still a work in progress, but I don't think Poland sees that much threat from the Baltics as yet. However, try and understand Poland. Look at the map of Poland, and let's go clockwise. If you go clockwise, then right on top, right up north, is the Baltic Sea. Poland is not a landlocked country. That's the Baltic Sea. Baltic Sea, then if you go westwards from Baltic Sea, then through these very congested and complicated channels around Denmark, you will pass and you will go to North Sea and then into the Atlantic. So Baltic Sea is a very important area. Also, that's where Poland also shares a border with Russia. Now, you might think Russia is that so far. How come Poland has a border with Russia? That's because Kaliningrad is an exclave that Russia has. Exclave, we had explained to you the other day in the Azerbaijan-Armenian context, because Azerbaijan has an exclave territory in Armenia to which it wanted a corridor, which Donald Trump said America will take on 99-year lease and maintain, etc., etc. Similarly, the Russians have a large exclave called Kaliningrad. It is there, it has more than 1 million people living there. It is there that the Russians also maintain their Baltic fleet, the Baltic fleet of the Russian Navy. So it begins, first of all, border with Kaliningrad, with Russia. Then Lithuania, come clockwise. Then Lithuania, sizable border. Then Belarus. Then Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is now fully exposed to Russia. That war is right next to Poland's borders. Ukraine, after that, go clockwise. You have Slovakia, then Czech Republic or Czechia as it's now called, and then Germany. So Poland is not only very centrally located, but also it is definitely the eastern flank of NATO. That's the reason all of NATO is neurotic about Poland's security. And you can see that Poland itself does not take it lightly at all. It is the only country in Europe that is spending up to 5% of its sizable GDP that's rising on defense, 54 plus percent of which is spent on buying new high-tech equipment. Now, Poland is a NATO country. What happened when these drones came in? A NATO country's sovereignty was violated. So this triggered Article 4 of NATO. Article 4 does not automatically bring in military action, military intervention in support of a NATO member from other members. But what this leads to is an immediate consultation among members. So I will read from Article 4. It says the parties will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened. In this case, for example, I told you Dutch F-35s rose in defense of Polish airspace. Also, Italian airborne early warning systems were there to help. And finally, sometimes we think that our region, our neighborhood is very complicated. It has a very complicated history. Europe also has its own complications, particularly this part of Europe, actually all of Europe. So our complications come from our colonial past and our borders drawn by the colonial rulers at that point, and also how the subcontinent got divided. In Europe, much of it is rooted in the two world wars, although even in the past, there's a history of warfare there. Anglo-French, Franco-German, Poland has been at war. Many other countries have been at war within Europe. So Europe has its own problems, even between Ukraine and Poland. Although Ukraine depends so much on Poland right now, so many Ukrainians have taken refuge in Poland. But there is the old history of something called Volhynia massacre. That's where more than 1 lakh Polish people were massacred by Ukrainian partisans. Now that's very complex history. Maybe Swasti will explain to us a little bit. The Poles have been wanting to go to Ukraine to exhume those graves. Ukrainian nationalists consider those partisans to be heroes and Ukrainian nationalists because they were fighting against people who they saw as having subjugated Ukraine. Those exhumations were allowed this year. However, within Poland, particularly on the Polish nationalist right, there is a view that Ukrainians have shown ingratitude. They haven't said thank you sufficiently loudly and sufficiently often. It's the same problem, not saying thank you enough, that Donald Trump had with Volodymyr Zelensky. And these bodies, by the way, which had been exhumed, these were reburied just last Saturday. So there is complex history behind everything in this region. That's the reason we need Swasti Rao on the line from Warsaw to explain to us what's going on. Swasti, you were not trained to be a journalist, but you still have reporters' luck. You are where the action is, in Poland. So did you know that this was going to happen and plan this visit to Poland exactly at this time? How come you found yourself in the middle of action?
Well, Shekhar, first of all, good wishes to everybody in India. No, this is definitely not sort of preordained or decided, because I'm on my way to Ukraine to attend a very important security conference that happens there annually. And of course, the only way to go to Ukraine is via Poland. In fact, only yesterday yesterday afternoon, I had a very lively, very important engagement with one of the think tanks that is attached to their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And because India and Poland have signed a very recent strategic partnership, so of course there are so many deliverables that the two sides are now discussing on. And last night I was with, some advisors to the foreign ministry, etc. And nobody really imagined that later that night, last night around 1 a.m., to be exact, I think 14 minutes past 1 in the night, local time, the first Ukrainian, it was reported that the first Russian drone crossed the Ukrainian borders into Poland. And ever since, of course, there's been, in the morning, there's been a lot of hue and cry about having emergency meetings. That's what the Prime Minister and the President have been saying. So the first meeting happened at 8 a.m. And then, they have now decided to invoke the Article 4, which you mentioned, which is about formal consultations. And, this is something serious. So about 19, according to some reports, it's also 23 drones, which we don't know the origin yet. They have not been formally disclosed. But what we know from the debris here is that they are, the Shahed drones, which were assembled in Russia. So they could be the J-Ran types. And they have entered the Polish territory, especially the eastern part of Poland, because, as you know, Poland sort of shares its borders not only with the Baltic countries like Lithuania, but also Belarus and then Ukraine. And then, of course, a little part of north of Poland is also, shares the border with Russia in Kaliningrad. So naturally, this is something which is in many ways a first direct escalation of conflict, between Russia and NATO states. So as of now, the drones have been shot down. Yes, 4 airports were closed down, including the one that you see behind me, which is the main Frederick Chopin Airport in Warsaw. So there were some delays of flights, but then the airport is now functioning, just as it was earlier. So yes, a bit of a tense moment, and nobody really saw it coming last night.
So what's the sense here since you've been meeting people? Could it be a deliberate provocation? Could it be a deliberate provocation with Putin reminding Trump and Europe and the rest of the world that, look, you have a problem. You can't, you don't calculate on me calming down. I can come and knock at your doors somewhat rudely as they've done in Poland. Do you think this is just drones straying in error?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I mean, going by the formal statements made both by the Prime Minister as well as the President, please remember that Prime Minister and President both belong to different parties, but they have completely, a unified voice when it comes to this kind of security crisis. Now, it is very clear, at least here, as reported by the Polish media and the formal statements coming from the MFA, etc., that this is an act which is deliberate. And in fact, one of the reasons which was cited when Article 4, the formal consultations were invoked, was that this is an act which is deliberate and this should not be left scot-free. Now, many more details have to emerge, Shekhar, for everybody to make sense of the complete picture. Now, there are also handles, especially the pro-Russia handles, that are reporting now that this is actually not really done by Russians, but these are some Ukrainian-made drones. But this is what happens, because if you remember in 2022, there were certain missiles that had entered the Polish territory, but then later on it was finally discovered that they were not really fired into Poland, but there were certain, debris of missiles that fell into the Polish side, because if you, like I said, that, Poland and Ukraine have a long border. So, I mean, those kind of conspiracy theories are also doing the rounds, but from the formal side, the thing that has been made clear is that this is an act which is deliberate, and therefore NATO's Article 4 has been invoked. So this has not come many times in the past. In fact, as you know, that Article 5 has only been invoked once in its history, which is after the 2001 attack on the US. But as far as Article 4 is concerned, which is about formal consultations, mostly it has been invoked by Eastern European countries. And of course, now we see that happening with Poland. Now, very quickly, there are two things. One, I said that it is an act which is deliberate. And the second thing is that from Russia's perspective, this is a signaling because, as you know, that lately there were some talks about coalition of the willing headed by Emmanuel Macron, who's the president of France, saying that we are ready to deploy troops on the ground, because recently Russia has been intensifying its drone attacks, particularly drone attacks on Ukraine, and hundreds of drones are launched into Ukrainian skies almost every other night. So that's one. The other is to also sort of, reduce the basically affect the public opinion, which has been very supportive of Ukraine. So naturally, any country, when its populations get drawn into the war, I mean, this particular time there are no casualties, of course, but this is really also to sort of somewhere trigger this notion that supporting Ukraine is not really in your favor. And the third thing is, of course, is also to test waters in terms of how ready is NATO for taking any real action, because Poland has also been asking very vociferously to pass the new sanctions against Russia. So I think there is a mix of lot of things. But yes, this is what we have today. Morning, yes.
Well, what an irony that the only time Article 5 has been invoked is when the US was attacked, and US was not attacked by a state. NATO was formed to fight the Soviet power, but Article 5 was only invoked when US was attacked not by any state but by stateless actors, Al Qaeda in that case. That was over 9/11, so everybody came together. Now, you are in Poland, you study this region. Tell us a little bit more about Poland. How has Poland been growing? How has it been building its armed forces? Where does Poland stand in Europe and the world? In 2 minutes, I know that you have a flight to catch, and also it must be cruel to be enduring this really super sharp European sunshine with so much UV in it.
Yeah. So, okay, fine. I mean, I'm enjoying the sun. It's a little actually nippy. So, it's quite comfortable right now to be in the sun, unless it's like for hours. So, a little time is fine. So, quickly, what is Poland? So, Poland has recently sort of joined the trillion, dollar GDP club. And now Poland wishes to join the G20 soon. Poland has been one of the fastest growing, economies in Europe. And more than that, as far as the Polish defense posture is concerned, Shekhar, that is something that has been quite scintillating, because Poland, even before Donald Trump made it mandatory for other European and NATO members to start, at least on paper, to agree to spending 5% of their GDPs on defense, Poland was one country followed by Estonia, which is a very small country, but nonetheless, which was already spending 4.1% of its GDP. And Poland this year, they've already formally announced that in 2025, they're going to take the defense spending to about 4.7%, which makes it the only country in Europe to really reach those numbers. And in terms of numericals, I mean, how it looks is that their defense budget is now standing at about 30 billion euros, which means a little bit more in dollars. So, which is quite a lot. And as you know, that if you study the modernization of Polish defense industries, I'm sure everybody in India should also know that one of the drones that we used against Pakistan in Operation Sindoor, according to the Press Information Bureau releases that our MOT does, were the WB Electronics drones. So Poland has some formidable capabilities when it comes to drones and counter drones, warfare. India, of course, has been a beneficiary of that as well, because, of course, our and Polish ties goes a really long way back, all the way back to the Soviet times and even now. But having said that, I think it's a very different ball game when you see the same kind of thing unfolding in your own territory. So all the drones have been shot down, and as you can see, Poland has also officially thanked the Dutch, also NATO headquarters, and the Italian AWACS. I saw you mention that as well. So far, I mean, it's been. I think this is only going to grow. So we will see a further intensification of drones and counter drone capabilities, not just in Ukraine, I mean, not just in Poland, but also all through the NATO countries. In fact, one of the developments that has been done after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if you look at the latest strategic concept of NATO in 2022 that came out in the Madrid summit, they categorically mentioned the technological innovations in drones and counter drone warfare. So that is going to be key.
Well, it's quite an irony, no, that Poland, the country where Warsaw is located, and the country of Warsaw Pact, in a way, it's central to Warsaw Pact, is now also the country with the strongest position against Putin and Russia.
Well, I mean, so far, this is how it's been, because Poland has been also very categorical in stating about how it has been a victim of Russia's imperialism. And in fact, whenever I've spoken to Polish officials or Polish, leaders, they've always said that this is one thing that they find common in India's experience of colonialism with the British, and their experience of colonialism with the Soviets. So, to be honest, Poland has also earlier, when they did not join NATO and the EU, they were also part of these lobby groups in East Europe that really tried very hard of ex-Warsaw countries and ex-Soviet countries to try and lobby to sort of get into the Western Bloc. So Poland has a lot of things to its credit. They are very hardworking people, and like I said, that at a time when you see the major economies of Europe, like Germany, of France, France is also seeing a lot of economic trouble. You do see a big country along the Eastern Front, which is very clear in its priorities. Now, having said that, they do not want to enter a live war, and they are also fighting a lot of disinformation. I saw you mention that because there has been a complicated history between Poland and Ukraine when they did not really exist as independent states, and a lot of things have happened. But Poland tries very hard to sort of, uproot that disinformation and really keep the country together as far as supporting Ukrainians is concerned. Because Poland also became one of the top destinations for Ukrainian refugees. So more than 1 million Ukrainians live and work in Poland. So I think that sense is also important. And domestically, there are a lot of efforts going on in the country to sort of dispel disinformation, which is coming from a different era and time, different era and time, and to sort of stick together at a time when Europeans say that their security is under threat and they need to put together a new security order and rely less and less on the United States, because I think that's been the key takeaway.
Well, fascinating place to be in, Swasti, because Poland has a democratic impulse. Because remember, that's where the first big challenge to Soviet power and Soviet control and Sovietized governance of these states came in with the solidarity movement, like Wałęsa. So Poland has that history. So really fascinating place for you to be visiting at this time, and brilliant luck for all of us to have you there. So thank you very much. Once you come back from Ukraine, travel safely. We will talk more about what you saw, what we saw there. Bring us more wisdom from the most critical zone in the world right now.
Thank you, Shekhar. Lovely talking to you.